if you look at what excellence or effectiveness is, it almost always boils down to, from the person or the organization's perspective, something that you think is good, and you identify the constituency for whom it's good. Scaling is a responsibility for senior management, but when we look at organizations that tend to maintain and spread excellence, one thing that happens, and sometimes senior management is the architect, and frankly, sometimes it happens despite them rather than because of them, but somehow or another, there's that feeling in the organization, and this is accountability, but more specifically, that I own it, and the other part, which is really important, which is it owns me. And when we see we see that at Pixar, we see that at IDEO. General Electric just sort of amazes me in their ability to create that. You see it certainly in startups. There was a little startup we studied, which just got acquired by the name of Pulse, and they were acquired by LinkedIn. And we sort of went in there, and everybody acted like they had the obligation to tell other people what to do, and also to be told what to do. And Ankit and Akshay, the two guys who started it, they said, we're the founders and we have most of the stock, but those guys tell us what to do every day because they want it to be great. Sometimes when we see situations where excellence fades away, one example was a completely different example. In the Korean War, we sort of studied this case of Ridgway, who sort of came in, and the United States was on the verge of just being crushed in the Korean War. And a lot of what he did was he not only gave him courage, but he created this sense of mutual obligation to the buddies, to him. And some of that was courage, but some of it was also that sense of mutual obligation. If you've got 20 people, you can't instill excellence on them, everyone by yourself, let alone if you've got thousands and thousands of people working for you. So creating that environment, that sort of Pixar, IDEO, General Electric type environment is the kind of thing that we're looking at. In the book, we call it the Buddhism-Catholicism trade-off. And it's the trade-off between, well, do we have sort of a vague mindset and everybody sort of does their version of local customization? That's kind of like Buddhism. Or do we do it Catholicism, where kind of what happens in the Vatican is supposed to be replicated everywhere in the world with some relatively minor adjustments? And it actually turns out, although ideologically people fall on different poles, that sliding up and down that continuum is one of the key things that decision makers, when they scale up excellence, fight with every day. So to give you an example, two U.S. firms, In-N-Out Burger, in California, we love In-N-Out Burger. The quality is so good. But there's a reason there's only about, I think it's 1,000 In-N-Out Burgers total. And just a few years ago, there was 40. They're all in the United States. They're all the same. And you look at McDonald's international expansion, well, they've actually allowed a lot more Buddhism. And then another example we go into some detail is IKEA's successful entry into China, where they kind of kept a lot of the same products, changed a few, but they realized they were in a culture where people, it's a do it for me culture, not a do it yourself culture. So they kind of cranked up the assembly and delivery service. Another example, Richard Illy, of Illy Coffee. Those of us who've been to Italy, we know that Italians, they go to a coffee bar, they slug the thing down, and they run away, right? And so you can have a little tiny footprint in Italy. Well, this did not work in India, where it was a much different sort of culture. And because people sit around and talk, and having coffee is a different thing. And so they needed much more sort of square footage, and they needed seats. When we see excellence, we cannot find a case where excellence scales immediately, quickly, and easily. It's something that people struggle and fight with every day. The key notion here is you've got to treat it like a ground war, not an air war. You're spreading a mindset, not just a footprint. And the other side of that, of course, when you start getting away from it, that's where you get so much into expansion, you forget about it. And exhibit one, at least in U.S. business culture, in international business culture, is Starbucks. And this is one of the reasons that Schultz had to come back as CEO, is he knows, there's a famous memo that he wrote throughout the company that, we've expanded so much, we've basically lost, by our definition of excellence, it's become, and he used the term, it's become watered down, the sort of coffee metaphor. This idea of a mindset, not a footprint, which is real important. So there's this it's actually a for-profit startup. It's called Bridge International Academies. They charge $5 per student, which is, and in their model is Starbucks, that they're going to have, and they're actually more standardized than Starbucks, I would actually say, incredibly standardized schools. And the concept is that you're from a poor family in Africa. You send your child to the school. You pay by cell phone. And the way it works is they hire these teachers who teach in a very rigid, regimented way. And so when we talked to Shannon May, one of the co-founders, she said when we opened our first school, since in our mind we were going to scale up, we could have done things like been there in person. Everything had to be done electronically as if we had 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 schools. Now, we just talked to them last week, 150 schools. They're actually the largest private school system in all of Africa. We also interviewed Shona Brown, former McKinsey, left McKinsey and got this sort of lousy job being number 4 at Google about a couple months before they went public. And Shona said from our earliest days, and this is a Larry Page thing, our concept was when we brought somebody in a role, even though we needed a warm body so desperately, and there's a lot to do at Google, and Googlers would be working late, what we would do is say, can they grow into the next role and the next role after that and grow with us because we believe we're going to keep growing? And that, to me, takes some kind of self-control. And in both of those cases, the principle is that you're linking the present to the future that you hope to achieve. And you may not achieve that future, but your odds are a lot better if you think like Shannon May or Shona Brown did at Google.